The man who once stood before Britain as the face of clean politics has just been dealt the most humiliating blow of his career, not by Parliament, not by protesters, but by the highest legal authority in the land. The Supreme Court, in a move that has sent shockwaves through every corner of the country, has issued a formal ruling ordering Keir Starmer to step down from his position as Labour leader. Why? Because explosive documents leaked live on national television have exposed a £4 million secret deal tied to a Cayman Islands hedge fund. Money was funneled through a maze of offshore accounts and linked to fossil fuels, the arms trade, and private healthcare profiteers. What was once whispered in political backrooms is now undeniable and official. Starmer is trapped. The public is furious, and the halls of Westminster are collapsing into chaos. The ruling came without warning. In an unprecedented move, the Supreme Court released a public judgment that not only validated the damning evidence against Starmer, but declared that his continued leadership posed a direct threat to public trust in democratic institutions. At the heart of the decision lies the now infamous £4 million donation traced back to a hedge fund registered in the Cayman Islands, notorious as a global tax haven and a refuge for some of the world's most secretive and morally questionable investments. The documents, which first surfaced during a heated television panel debate, stunned the nation. Today, those same documents have been examined by the highest judges in the country and deemed authentic, legally significant and politically devastating. According to the court's findings, Labour under Keir Starmer accepted this enormous donation without proper declaration, bypassing the rigorous standards of party funding transparency required by law. Worse still, the hedge fund has direct stakes in industries Labour has publicly vowed to oppose. Fossil fuel conglomerates, arms manufacturing companies and private healthcare providers profiting from the struggling NHS. Public anger turned into a legal firestorm when a coalition of watchdog organisations and former Labour members filed a case against Starmer, arguing that he had violated the principles of ethical leadership and party integrity. Shockingly, the court agreed. This constitutes a betrayal not only of party policy, read the official judgment, but of the British public's right to know who funds their elected representatives. Within minutes of the ruling, news outlets across the country lit up with breaking headlines. Social media platforms ignited with hashtags like hashtag Starmer must go, hashtag Supreme Court shock, and hashtag Cayman Gate explodes. Live footage showed crowds gathering outside Labour HQ in London, chanting for justice and waving placards reading, "Fraud must fall," and "Not my leader." Inside the party's headquarters, the mood was described by one staffer as total collapse. Phones rang off the hook, MPS scrambled to distance themselves, communications officers were silenced, locked in urgent meetings, desperate to contain a disaster that had already spiralled far beyond control. At the centre of it all was Keir Starmer. Sources close to the embattled Labour leader reported that he had been blindsided by the court's swiftness. Expecting months of legal wrangling, he now faced an immediate and non-negotiable demand: resign or risk a full criminal investigation into electoral fraud and misconduct in public office. His legal advisors, political aides and inner circle were reportedly shell-shocked. No one had anticipated the judiciary would move with such speed or force. The court's language was direct and unforgiving, stating that Starmer had willfully ignored multiple warnings about the risks of accepting large offshore donations without full disclosure. Internal Labour emails presented as evidence showed senior figures raising concerns months before the donation was finalised. Those concerns, the court noted, were brushed aside in pursuit of campaign advantage. And now that pursuit has come crashing down. Back in Westminster, the political fallout unfolded at breakneck speed. Tory ministers stood outside Parliament, gleefully addressing cameras, calling it the greatest political scandal in modern British history. Reform UK's leader released a chilling statement accusing Labour of selling out the working class to foreign profiteers. Even Liberal Democrat MPs, normally restrained in tone, called the situation a national disgrace that demanded immediate resignation. Perhaps the most telling response came from within Starmer's own party. Several shadow ministers quietly removed references to him from their social media bios. Angela Rayner, deputy leader of the Labour Party, abruptly cancelled a planned press appearance and reportedly went silent. One anonymous Labour MP was quoted as saying, "This is no longer a leadership crisis, it's a funeral procession." The weight of the ruling is not merely symbolic. Legal experts confirm that if Starmer refuses to resign, the path is open for further legal action, potential criminal charges, and an emergency parliamentary vote of no confidence. His enemies, both within and outside Labour, are circling, and the public, once cautiously hopeful for his promise of transparency and renewal, now appears unified in its demand for justice. As the evening sun set over Westminster, the country held its breath, watching the once untouchable Labour leader teeter on the edge of political annihilation. The man who vowed to restore trust in British politics now stands accused by the nation's highest court of betraying everything he claimed to stand for. As headlines screamed across the nation and opposition leaders sharpened their knives, one question echoed louder than ever. Will Keir Starmer obey the court's order and step down? As the Supreme Court ruling reverberated across Britain, it triggered more than a media firestorm. It lit the fuse on an all-out civil war within the Labour Party. Once held together by a fragile promise of unity, Labour's internal structure has begun to crumble at terrifying speed. With the court's demand for Starmer's resignation growing louder by the hour, dozens of Labour MPs, councillors and former allies have begun openly rebelling. What was once simmering discontent behind closed doors has exploded into full-blown mutiny. Meetings are being cancelled, whips ignored, and Labour's leadership apparatus is buckling under the weight of unprecedented internal collapse. In a series of bombshell developments, more than 40 sitting Labour MPs have reportedly signed a private letter demanding Starmer resign immediately in the interest of party survival. Among the signatories are shadow ministers, regional party heads, and long-serving MPs from safe Labour seats. Their message is clear. If Starmer refuses to comply with the Supreme Court's directive, they will walk. The letter, now leaked to multiple press outlets, paints a picture of a party on the brink of annihilation. One line in particular has stunned observers. "We will not go down with a captain who knowingly steers us into disaster." The Labour front bench is in turmoil. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting, once one of Starmer's fiercest defenders, is reportedly considering resignation. Yvette Cooper has held emergency meetings to assess the possibility of installing an interim leader before the general election. Party insiders describe the atmosphere as tense and tearful. Rumours swirl that Lisa Nandy is being floated as a temporary caretaker to prevent the complete collapse of Labour's electoral machinery. While some scramble for survival, others are sharpening their knives. Momentum, the grassroots movement that once backed Jeremy Corbyn, is reportedly preparing mass mobilisation to force Starmer out. Their statement was brutally direct. Starmer has betrayed the values of this party. He must go now or the people will remove him. Protests outside Labour offices in multiple cities have already begun, organised by local Momentum chapters calling for a clean break from corruption. Internal communications have become a battlefield. WhatsApp groups of Labour MPs have descended into chaos with leaked messages showing furious arguments, resignations from chats, and threats of mass walkouts. Constituency Labour parties across the country are holding emergency meetings and members draft motions of no confidence in Starmer's leadership, an act unheard of at this scale since the height of Labour's Brexit infighting. Meanwhile, Starmer remains silent. Sources describe him as isolated, irritable and in denial. Advisers are split between urging a dignified exit and pushing for a televised defence. No speech has come. Only silence. That silence is enraging colleagues. Every passing hour fuels the rebellion and political vultures are circling. Nigel Farage wasted no time declaring the Labour Party is no longer a party, it's a crime scene. Conservatives have launched a media blitz demanding emergency hearings, while Liberal Democrats call for a full Electoral Commission investigation into Labour's finances. Public reaction has been explosive. Polling shows 72% of voters believe Starmer should resign immediately, including nearly half of Labour voters. Social media is flooded with images of torn membership cards and calls for boycotts. Petitions are circulating to strip Starmer of his knighthood. This is not just a political crisis, it is existential. Labour faces electoral extinction. Union support is wavering, funding is at risk, and the party's future hangs by a thread. As Britain hurtles toward a constitutional and electoral crisis unseen in decades, Parliament is gridlocked, public trust is collapsing, and speculation of a snap election grows louder. Media outlets are in a frenzy. Allegations of undeclared luxury gifts, EU-linked lobbying and secret communications have ignited outrage across the political spectrum. Investigations are opening, institutions are under scrutiny, and the nation feels betrayed and leaderless. Across cities, protests erupt. Voters demand transparency, reform and accountability. Within Labour HQ, panic reigns, staff are fleeing, PR firms are backing away, and campaign operations are freezing. Union leaders issue ultimatums. Ordinary citizens watch in disbelief as the illusion of integrity in public life shatters. What follows next may prove even more destabilising than the ruling itself. Behind closed doors, emergency discussions are now taking place at the very highest levels of the state. Senior civil servants, constitutional lawyers and election officials are reportedly working around the clock to prepare for scenarios that until days ago were considered unthinkable. Contingency plans for a leadership vacuum, snap elections and even temporary cross-party governance arrangements are being quietly drafted. The fear inside Whitehall is no longer hypothetical. It is immediate. One senior official, speaking anonymously, described the atmosphere as pre-crisis mode, warning that Britain is inches away from a legitimacy breakdown if public confidence continues to erode at this pace. Financial markets have begun to react. The pound has shown signs of volatility as investors digest the political uncertainty, while business leaders warn that prolonged instability could derail already fragile economic recovery efforts. International allies are watching closely. Diplomatic sources confirm that several European and Commonwealth governments have requested briefings on the situation, concerned about Britain's reliability as a negotiating partner. Privately, some have expressed disbelief that a country long seen as a model of institutional stability could be plunged into such turmoil so quickly. Inside Labour's grassroots base, the sense of betrayal runs deep. Long-time activists who spent years defending the party's ethical credentials now feel exposed and humiliated. Community organisers report mass resignations from local branches, cancelled fundraising events, and volunteers refusing to campaign until leadership accountability is restored. For many, this is not about factional politics, but moral collapse. One veteran campaigner summed it up bluntly: "We knocked on doors promising honesty, now we look like liars," as pressure intensifies rumours swirl of further leaks yet to come. Investigative journalists hint that additional documents involving lobbying meetings, donor correspondence and undeclared hospitality are still under review. If released, they could widen the scandal beyond Starmer himself and implicate senior figures across the political establishment. The warning signs are clear. This story is not finished. It is accelerating. Meanwhile, public patience is wearing thin. Phone-ins, town halls and street interviews reveal a country exhausted by scandal and hungry for accountability. Trust, once lost, is proving impossible to restore with silence. Every unanswered question deepens suspicion. Every delayed response hardens anger. The sense that politics operates by a different set of rules has never felt stronger. As night falls over Westminster, once again, the symbolism is hard to ignore. The lights remain on in offices long past midnight, aides pacing corridors, advisors whispering into phones, futures being rewritten in real time. Britain stands at a crossroads. The next move, whether resignation, confrontation or collapse, will not just decide the fate of one man or one party. It will define whether the country can still claim faith in the system that governs it. As dawn breaks over the capital, the consequences of inaction are becoming impossible to ignore. The longer the crisis drags on, the more corrosive its effects become. Senior judges, normally silent once a ruling is delivered, are reportedly alarmed by the refusal to comply swiftly with the court's directive. Legal scholars warn that prolonged defiance risks setting a dangerous precedent. one in which political leaders test the limits of judicial authority and erode the separation of powers. Quiet conversations are now taking place about enforcement mechanisms rarely discussed in modern Britain. Measures that underline just how far this confrontation could escalate if the standoff continues. Within Parliament, nerves are fraying. Cross-party committees have suspended routine business as MPs are pulled into emergency briefings. Draft motions circulate hourly, rewritten again and again as alliances shift and calculations change. Some lawmakers fear that any delay will be interpreted by voters as complicity, while others worry that acting too fast could plunge the country into deeper chaos. The atmosphere is brittle, charged with suspicion, and thick with the sense that every decision carries historic weight. The media, sensing a turning point, has moved into relentless overdrive. Rolling news channels broadcast wall-to-wall coverage, replaying courtroom language, leaked messages, and emotional reactions from across the country. Editorial lines harden by the hour. Where there was once cautious analysis, there is now open condemnation. Commentators speak of a watershed moment, a rupture in the post-war political consensus that assumed basic honesty as a minimum requirement for leadership. That assumption, many argue, no longer holds. Public demonstrations continue to swell. What began as scattered protests has grown into coordinated national action. From city centres to small market towns, the citizens gather with homemade signs and raw anger. The chants are no longer just about one leader or one party. They are about a system that feels distant, unaccountable and rigged against ordinary people. Police maintain a visible presence, wary of escalation but mindful of the right to protest. So far, the demonstrations remain largely peaceful, but the intensity of emotion is unmistakable. Behind the scenes, donors and power brokers are making their own calculations. Several major contributors to Labour have quietly frozen funding, awaiting clarity on leadership and direction. Others are reportedly demanding written assurances of reform before any future support is considered. These financial tremors threaten to paralyse campaign operations nationwide, leaving candidates without resources and organisers without direction. For a party already on the brink, the financial squeeze could be decisive. The international dimension grows more pronounced by the day. Foreign media frame the crisis as a cautionary tale about complacency in democratic systems. Allies express concern not just about leadership credibility, but about policy continuity, trade negotiations and security cooperation. Britain's global reputation, painstakingly built over decades, is being tested in real time. Each unanswered question chips away at the image of stability the country has long projected abroad. Amid the noise, a deeper reckoning is taking place among the public. Conversations in homes, workplaces and online forums reflect a profound sense of disillusionment. Many citizens speak openly about disengaging from politics altogether, convinced that no party truly represents them. Others argue the opposite, that this moment, however painful, could spark long overdue reform. Calls grow louder for stricter donation laws, real-time transparency and harsher penalties for breaches of trust. As the clock ticks on, the options narrow. A dignified resignation could still contain the damage, allowing space for renewal and reform. A defiant stand risks dragging institutions into a prolonged and ugly confrontation. Every path forward carries consequences, but standing still is no longer one of them. The country feels suspended in a moment of uneasy anticipation, waiting for the next move that will tip the balance. History has a way of crystallising around such moments. What feels chaotic and overwhelming now will one day be reduced to a chapter, a lesson, a warning. Whether that chapter is titled Collapse or Correction depends on decisions made in the coming hours and days. Britain is watching, not as passive spectators, but as stakeholders in a system whose legitimacy hangs in the balance. And as the pressure reaches breaking point, one truth becomes impossible to escape. This crisis will not simply fade away. It will end only when accountability finally catches up with power. As the standoff deepens, cracks are beginning to appear not just within Labour, but across the entire political class. Senior figures from multiple parties privately admit that the crisis has exposed vulnerabilities long ignored. Whispered conversations in Westminster bars and committee rooms point to a shared fear. If this scandal fully unravels, it may not stop with one leader. The mechanisms that allowed questionable funding, opaque lobbying, and blurred ethical lines to exist for years are now under a merciless spotlight. And once that light is turned on, there is no telling how far it will reach. Civil society groups have seized the moment. Transparency advocates, anti-corruption charities, and constitutional reform movements are coordinating like never before. Joint statements demand sweeping reform, including real-time disclosure of political donations, independent oversight of party finances, and expanded powers for regulators to act before scandals metastasise. Legal experts argue that Britain's system has relied too heavily on good faith, and that this crisis proves good faith is no longer enough. Pressure is mounting for Parliament to legislate rapidly, even as it struggles to function. Inside the civil service, morale is reportedly faltering. Officials tasked with upholding standards feel caught between political paralysis, space, and public outrage.